Today, I wanted to reflect together on something that I care about a lot. And I think, I'm sure that you all feel the same. It's something that it's not a question of being good or bad. It's a question of being. And there are some things that you don't need to get into whether you like it or not. You don't need to talk about it so much. The question does it exist or not? But if you want to hide yourself behind a finger, you can try, but we know that that doesn't work. Often I see many worries that we live um, in some uncertainties, the situation of the economy. It's not the best moment. I see different people who, talking a little bit, it comes out that they're having a hard time because maybe they set their mortgage at a variable tax. And I know because as our center, we're in the same situation and we know how things are. And there's the war, the wars, there's the geopolitical instability, so many possibilities in front of us, uncertainties related to our environment, and I can go on and on. Many other things that affect us all, many of us. But there's something in the middle of all this that when there is something that worries us, what should we do theoretically? Act, right? Prepare ourselves, take care of that thing somehow. If I'm worried about what's going on with the environment, for example, I should try to act accordingly and not wait for someone else to do something about it, right? Or if I'm worried about what has to do with the wars, so what should I do? And here we could open up a world of discussions. But one thing that I think is fundamental is that I need to live with coherence in my own life, even on an intellectual level, because we're bombarded with a tremendous amount of information. So we should try to live accordingly. And this isn't the subject today. This past Monday, I talked about this specifically. So let's take advantage of the recordings. So I send you back to Morning Inspirations teachings from Monday. But in the middle of all this, there is something certain. Even in a period where we are, how can I say, where something is just put right in front of our eyes. It's highlighted so strongly, so clear to us, but somehow, even if it's right in front of our eyes, we pretend that it doesn't exist. And I'm talking about our own mortality. Okay, an economic crisis or not, or whether the environment goes this way or that way, or this war ends in one way or another, we are going to die, and nobody can take that away from us. That's why I said this is something that affects all of us. It's not the majority. There's not a lot of choice here. Sooner or later, we are going to die. And it's strange because we're able somehow, how can I say, to live in a kind of disconnect, a disconnect from reality. A little bit like when someone has a strong trauma and that person loses his memory. So something that is so difficult to face that we pretend it doesn't exist, or it just doesn't exist for us. Why? I don't know. Has anyone ever had any doubt about having to die? The other day I heard a phrase in Latin, I think is in an ancient Latin. I don't remember from which philosopher. It's, I would say, Buddhist teachings. Uh, it was something like the death is certain and the time of death is uncertain. And in Buddhist teachings, we talk about specifically that, the certainty of death and the uncertainty of the time of death. But for some strange reason, I don't know why, we we hide ourselves from ourselves. That we hide from ourselves the fact that we're going to die. And even when we have it printed right in front of us day after day, open up any newspaper, any information, the news. I mean, how many deaths are there per day? Reading the news yesterday, I was a little shocked. It said it, it said that one of these video games, Fortnite, I think, um, they showed this new game, that is online video game, and they had a record, like 45 million people playing online at the same time. And in these games, what does one do? Kill, mostly. And there's a whole other topic. There's how these games are made, and they have a structure within a dynamic actually that mirrors the mind of a soldier, and developing a mind that doesn't have problem with killing. They did research on this in the United States, and they saw that young people actually in the military have a lot less problem taking life compared to the Second World War, because young people have grown up in a virtual world killing. And if in Buddhist teachings we say that when one makes offerings, mental offerings, visualized, that helps one's ability to share materially. If one virtually kills, some kind of effect it will have, clearly. But that's also another topic. The point of today is, we're faced daily with death. What about eating meat? You eat meat, you think that that piece of flesh didn't belong to a living being that didn't have to die for you to have that plate of food. But that's not the point of these teachings either. My point is, if we look, we are constantly reminded that death is part of life. It's not that every once in a while it appears. No, every day. It, many things remind us of this. And death is lived as something that's absolutely is the worst thing that could happen. When death is lived today as a kind of loss. Even in the hospitals, often they don't show a dead body. As soon as someone dies, they take the body away. We really try to not come in contact with a deceased, with a dead body. But I ask myself if we like it or not. The fact that we will die it's a fact. It's there. And for me, there's a very simple logic, which is for which there is no solution is not a problem. So the fact that I need to die, that I will die, is a fact, and in and of itself is not a problem. The the day that I will die, I don't think that it's a loss, and there isn't the alternative of winning. I mean, who can win over death? I can win, let's say, over sickness, I or overcome some kind of danger. But sooner or later, it's my turn, isn't it? And what I mean to say here is I want to remind us that it's normal. It's normal that we die, to bring a little bit of normality to death. There's nothing wrong or bad about dying. The problem is another one, and it's much more serious. The problem is living life badly, because there's a solution to that. There's no solution to dying, but there is a solution to living our lives poorly, badly. When a cycle ends, okay, the way in which that cycle concludes, two things: the way the cycle is lived and the way it's concluded determines what happens after, and the new cycle that will arise, will come from that. This is, for example, I do some kind of job, and the way I live that job, how I do the job, what I do, and the way I finish that job has an enormous influence over the new job that I'll start after that. And before taking on a new job, many opportunities come out. This bardo, this intermediate stage, and when a cycle ends before beginning another one, many possibilities come out. But the direction that we take for this new cycle starts from the closure of the last cycle and how we lived that previous cycle in a relationship, in a couple, for example. When a relationship ends, the way that one has lived it, the way that one has ended that relationship, it influences the next one. It doesn't determine it, but it influences it. During the intermediate, in the intermediate stage, one maybe can find a way to free oneself from negative aspects, but it's not sure. So the way that one lives and the one deaths influences strongly how one will be reborn. I don't. Another example, for example, how do I spend my day and how do I fall asleep? That influences my dreams. So how I sleep also influences how I wake up. Okay, so regardless of what we believe or not, of what happens, of what we think happens after death, or if we want to go even deeper in defining what death is, a couple times I've told this story about going to Rome, and I took a taxi. And at a certain point, the taxi driver looked at me and he said, "You dressed like that? Who are you?" And I tried to explain something, Buddhism, Lama, and he just kept looking at me even more strangely. And then he asked me, "But you, do you believe in death?" And I thought, what a strange question. And I said, "Well, it depends on what you mean by death." And then he looked at me even more strangely. And I said, "If for you, death means that everything exists, so if you believe that at death everything ends, and then I don't believe in death. But if you mean that at death serves something that continues, then yes, I believe in death. And I think we can all agree that at a certain point, this body stops working. And so what we call life in this body at a certain point no longer exists. So what happens at that point? Let's starting from the principle that nothing begins or ends. Everything transforms. The body transforms into something else. And I have no attachment to my body. I've already thought that, the day that I die, do what you want with it. It's, it doesn't mean much to me, sincerely, in the sense that I'm no longer there. It's not me anymore. If there's continuity after death, and I think that there is, then I will be somewhere else. And if there is no continuity, which I don't think is true, but if there isn't, then even more reason to not care. Lama Gangchen Rinpoche said that the body comes from the elements and goes back to the elements. It goes back to earth, goes back to fire, goes back to water. This reminds me of time with one of my masters, Ken Lakpala. There was a very sick boy, Western, and he had very strong connection with Ken Lakpala. And he said, if I were to die shortly, I'd like to live this object to this person. I made a kind of will. And then Gen Lakpala said, must stop. You want to be attached to your things even after dying? He was talking very few things. He was talking about some tankas he had. And Ken Lakpala said, no, leave everything to the monastery and the monastery will manage. Don't be attached. What I mean to say is that it's important for us to face this with a certain amount of naturalness. But taking something naturally, because once a new cycle opens, for that to end, for a new one to come out, we need to wait for that cycle to end. So where I'm going to be reborn, how important is that? This is so important. This reminds me of a friend of mine in the monastery, Geshe Losang Ninja, and every once in a while he would say, I don't know how true this was, or it was some kind of joke. And when we tell jokes, there's some kind of truth in there. He says, it's so hard for me to have a virtuous conduct, to be a correct person in life. And let's say with all this, and I'm able to take another human rebirth, but in a place where there's no possibility of following a valid spiritual practice. And I end up doing a bunch of stupid things because the predispositions for those things I have. And so his reasoning, joking a little bit, was, why put so much effort if I can lose it all in the next life? It's not a good reasoning. But there are two important factors. One is the way I die. This is going to it's going to strongly influence the new cycle that I'm going to take, my new birth. And that birth will determine a whole new reality of existence. And another point is what continues from one life to another. So let's use the example from before. So I have a job, I finish that job, and then I start another job. So is there something that I take from that first job to the second one? the things I learned, the also any kind of traumas, etc. And this is the same also we can say for relationships. So, so one question is where one it was born, how one is reborn, and who gets reborn. And so it becomes really important to prepare ourselves and not pretend that it's not going to happen. Like saying, it's like saying, I'm sure sooner or later I need to go on this trip. Am I preparing myself? One should, no? There was a phrase that my mother gave to a title, to a book that she wrote, and it was dying cannot be improvised. So it's important to die well, and there are many things that we can do. So when should one start preparing oneself for death? When you get the letter in the mail, or you get the diagnosis from a doctor, when should we start preparing ourselves for death? At least a small part of our time, a couple hours a week, to prepare ourselves. But what can we do? I've seen people who get to a strong awareness of their own mortality because they have an advanced age, they're older, or they're in a state where the body starts to give signs that it's not working so well, a problem here, a problem there, and they start telling themselves, I think that maybe I can die. But on a very real, practical level, what should I do? What should I do to prepare myself? And here there are 5 points that are part of Buddhist teachings called the 5 powers when faced with death. And I call it insurance for a good rebirth. Because if we could say, okay, you pay this monthly amount, I'm sure you'll have a good rebirth. So, but I mean, if we had any kind of doubt, I mean, we would pay for an insurance for a good rebirth. I don't really like insurance policies, but I see that that's also good to do. Imagine the insurance policy for a good rebirth. With the having, when in doubt, what should one do? One should take one. But there is an insurance policy for a good rebirth. But this insurance policy is not something that you can purchase. There are many aspects, but it's about one's own conduct. And the best thing is that to prepare oneself seriously for death and for what comes after death, one needs to have a certain quality of life and face certain aspects. And today I wanted to look at these 5 powers with you. They're quite simple. And what's beautiful about the 5 powers and preparing oneself in front of death, in the Guru Puja text, there's the verse that says the Tongna, are these the 5 powers, makes reference. May I, through the 5 powers, have a good rebirth, it says. So what are these 5 powers? The first one is called the power of virtue. The power of virtue, explaining on a practical level, is the non-attachment to material things. The power of virtue It's called the power of virtue because material things, there's a double meaning. So on one hand, it's worthless when at the time of death. Show me anyone who's taken things, the personal, material things with him at the time of death. I've told this story. Once a very, very rich person came to me and he said, you know, you have you have the system of recognizing someone in their rebirth. So what if I make a kind of rust and I put in like 100 million and I make it so that this money needs to be given to my reincarnation, and of course I leave a percentage to to who recognizes my reincarnation. And I said, "Whoa, that would be the great business, but I wouldn't trust anybody to do that." And I personally, I wouldn't even do it in in my dreams. I don't want to give anybody any strange ideas, but maybe for making money, it's not a bad idea. But one shouldn't, we shouldn't trust anyone who proposes this to us. The reality is that at death, we can't take anything with us. There's even a proverb or some very strong phrase that says, during life, you work very hard and you accumulate, and to accumulate wealth and many non-virtuous actions, lies, resentments, theft, you know, when you don't pay taxes or when you take things of others. So to accumulate wealth, you 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 accumulate a tremendous amount of negative karma, and then at the end of your life, everything that you've gotten, you've accumulated materially. You need to you leave it all, and you write down when you write down what you want done with all your wealth. But when you die, you take your negative karma with you, and what you've written, nobody respects it, and there you are with nothing that you've actually accumulated materially and your negative karma. I've already thought about this. What would what if one had to inherit also someone else's karma, the karma related to the accumulation of that wealth? Nobody would want that, but that's not possible. Our actions are our own, and they're non-transferable. But but just as material wealth has no worth when we die, and we can't take anything with us, at the same time, material things transcend death, or rather, during our life, what we accumulate materially this is fruit of our own energy. So if those things after our death are directed to something that continues to interact, it's like we continue to interact. It's a very simple example. For example, if I write a book and this is something material, and someone, in 50 years' time reads that book and receives benefit, am I part of that benefit or not? Yes, and so I receive a part of the result. I continue to generate energy through what I created, regardless of where I am. If I help in the creation of a hospital, and in 50, 100 years' time, that hospital keeps helping people and taking away pain and I'm still part I still receive that positive energy. And this is valid also for negative things as well. So in this immediate moment, living things, we should live our material wealth as a means and not as an ends, because attachment to wealth, material things, money, houses, regardless of what it is, these are means and not ends in of itself. So it means getting out of this dynamic of having to have, of accumulating for accumulating, because somehow when you possess or when you oh, when you possess something, there's some kind of pleasure or security in having something. So the first step is seeing material things as a means and not as an end in of itself. Say, okay, now this I need. So what are my needs? And based on those needs, I need to get organized. But the day that I die, what happens with those things? If I take even a part and I give them a virtuous direction, those material things will continue to generate a positive energy, regardless of where I find myself. And starting from a very practical level, if we want to to seriously look at these five powers, the first thing to do is to make a will, to write it down. It's not that hard. And then if tomorrow you change your mind, make another one. It doesn't have to be final and complicated for your whole your for the whole life. And if you have a doubt, look on the internet. You write down you look on the internet. So make sure that you don't have problems afterwards. But do it. Someone says, no, I'm not going to do it because I have this feeling that if I write my will, I'm calling death. It's the opposite. Lama Gangchen once said to me, death is a little bit like someone who wants to slap you. If somebody is threatening you to slap you and you say, no, come here, I'm ready, the person walks backwards. Instead, if you try to hide yourself and say, no, no, then that person comes closer and closer until they're able to slap you. And he would say, when one faces death without fear, this doesn't speed up death. Absolutely not. This is a baseless fear. We need to face it. We need to take care of this. It's part of a healthy life. So one of the first things is to write a will. There's also a living will, which I think is also very important, because we can spend hours talking about it. We can try to overcome. One thing is trying to overcome a sickness. There's some sicknesses that come and then naturally they will die. But there are other So one thing is overcoming a sickness. Another thing is trying to keep a body alive that would otherwise naturally die. Being hooked up to machines, for example, I personally don't believe in. So if one, it's not a given, but if one had to face something like this, one should also write down who they name as the one to take care of this decision. And if you want to write a message to do that, but it's important to write it down. A something written down. It's a concrete action where we're facing our death. It's real. It's a real fact. I'm preparing myself. Okay? It's not that difficult. I think we all know how to read and write. It means picking up a piece of paper and a pen. It has to be written. It has to be written, handwritten, if you don't want to go to a notary. And you write, I want to leave this and that to this person, that person. And if you want to ask for legal advice, or start facing this argument. At the same time, try to relate to material things as a means. There's a very nice exercise. It's not that hard. It's not easy either. And where you open up your closets and you look at the things you have and you ask yourself, do I need this? Do I not? So in other words, what function do you have for me? And if there's any object that we possess that doesn't have any function for us, I mean, something can have a function of being a memory or have the function of helping us feel sure about something, certainty about something. But if its function is being a possession, then the possibilities are selling it, giving it away, throwing it away, or finding a function for it. You know, we can upcycle, do something with it, find a function for it if the other choices are too painful. But the more things we possess that have no function for us, that I believe energetically that blocks us. There's something we're just attached to. We're sticky, stuck to it. It doesn't seem like it, but for many people, when faced with death, one of the hardest things is letting go of material things. They've worked so hard to get. I remember, unfortunately, it's a true story. It seems almost comical, but it's unfortunately a true story. It's a man who was quite wealthy and had a difficult character, personality. He was always fighting, arguing, and he died at home in a difficult situation. He had a kind of hospital bed at home, and in front of him, he had a art collection of paintings, and the last sentence he said before dying is, "It's mine." And you see that how hard it is to let go, because one identifies himself with the things that he possesses, and that's another subject. So on one side we say, oh, I'm so far from this attachment. Well, let's see. Open up your closet. Start looking. What are the things that you have and what function do they have for you? Because there's another question, and take an object and say, are you serving me or am I serving you? Because if I need to spend my time, my life, in keeping you clean, in making sure that you don't break, to make sure that you're being taken care of, but you have no function for me. I mean, when there's an exchange, fine, but when there's no exchange at all, it can even it could be even I take care of you, and one day when I need, I can sell you. That's a function. But when there's no function, you say, thank you for having been with me. Here, I offer you a new life. I'll find a new life for you. It's not that hard. Not through everything right away, a little bit at a time. You take something, a little something here, a little something there, and you start going through. your things. And this has to do with the first power, which is not that hard, in my opinion. Is it hard? Come on. It's possible, right? When now, no, not when we're faced with death. As we go forward, the powers become more difficult. But this one's possible for all of us. The second power is called the power of aspiration. But then the names don't correspond so easily. It means in just a few words, it means a non-attachment to our body. It means developing an identity that transcends this body, this name, this image. This fact of saying, I am not this image. This reminds me of a Chinese doctor who lived in Canada. And she lived, this is in a book, I read this. She lived her first 18 years in China, and then she went to Canada. And she said that after 2 or 3 years in Canada, for the first time, she remembered to think about herself, to judge herself based on her physical image. Before, her identity was based on her studies, her work, her conduct, her intelligence, etc. And then at a certain point, she realized that for the first time in her life, her identity was based on her appearance or the judgment from others. Because appearance, we say, I should please myself, but the way we take care of our image, is it based on how we see ourselves or on how others see us? This reminds me of a couple of friends who went to on their honeymoon on an island. It was an island of Togo, if I remember well. And they told me that to go to this island, they needed to take a small plane. And this small plane, there were local people, and on this island, the culture is for men and women, but mostly for women. For women to be beautiful, they have to be fat. And in this airplane, they would have the women. They would have everyone sit in a certain way to balance the weight. Even the king was in the past, the people needed to pay taxes based on the weight of the king. So the fatter he was, the better it was for them. So staying fat remained as something very beneficial. I asked myself, someone, in this case we're talking about a woman, who lives in a culture where being fat is not something positive, goes and lives goes to live on the island of Togo. And at the beginning, people say, "Are you okay? Are you sick?" And then you gain a kilo. Oh, you're starting to look better. Little by little, one's perception of self will change, right? And then let's say that one stays there without internet. I mean, your relationship, your reference points are the others there on the island. And so we would change. All of this to say that we're extremely attached to our own image. Those who say, oh, I'm not attached to my image because I dress in any way. So, well, you see somebody who just dresses anyway. Put that person in a tie and a suit and tie, and see if he feels comfortable like that. Probably not. So this second power is about letting go, realizing that I am not this image. I am not this body. I am what continues from day after day, from month after month, life after life. There's something that transcends this life. And to understand this well, there's an exercise that I created. I think it works quite well, but you need to try it yourself. So it's about writing a letter of introduction of yourself. So pick up pen and paper, write it out, handwrite it, and imagine that you write a letter introducing yourself. Imagine that someone reads this letter and needs to be able to find you among 1,000 different people. So if I get lost, through this letter, someone's going to find me. So let's write this letter, but there's some rules that make it a little more complicated. First of all, we can't talk about our own body. We can't say, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm tall, I'm short, my hair is like this. Nothing like that. You can't talk about your body. You can't say your name. You can't talk about any relationships. So we can't say I'm the father of, the husband, the wife of, the son of. You can't talk about your job. I'm a doctor, I'm a lama, I'm this, I'm that. We can't talk about what we possess. Oh, I'm the owner of this house. I'm the owner of that. No. And you ask yourself, well, what do I say? What's left? Let me just give you some examples. I'm a person that when I'm in front of someone who's in trouble, I pretend that I don't see anything and I run away. Or rather, when I see someone who's having trouble, I panic and I get blocked and I don't know what to do. Or when I see someone in trouble, I do everything possible to help that person. And then you can add what you want. I feel guilty when I don't help others, or I feel a tremendous amount of joy when I'm able to do even just a little bit. Or I'm the kind of person when I'm in front of a situation of hostility or tension, I feel like arguing even more. Or maybe in a situation of tension, I block myself and I try to go the other way. I'm not able to face conflict. I'm someone who, no matter what happens, I don't get angry. But maybe I have a lot of accumulated sadness that I'm not able to digest. I'm someone that it cares a lot about knowledge and likes to learn and expand more and more my horizon. Or I'm someone who I'm someone who really just wants to relax and have fun, watch a nice movie at the end of the day, and I don't want to learn anything that's not useful to me. There's another rule to this letter. No one, absolutely no one can read this letter other than ourselves. Why? Because if I'm writing a letter and I imagine that someone is going to read it, that person is going to read this, how should I put that in there? That other thing, I don't know. Okay, maybe I change it a little bit here, there. No one else should read it. And something else. We shouldn't worry about writing contradictory things because we're full of contradictions. Just write freehand. And once the first one is a little harder. You write a letter. You can cancel, you can strike it out. Take your time. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's an exercise. It's the exercise of doing which is important more than the result, where one looks inside beyond those other aspects. Having done that, you put it in an envelope, you write the date and put it somewhere somewhere safe. And after 6 months, a minimum 3, not less than 3 months, possibly 6 months, write another letter, another time. After having written that second letter, at that point you can open up that previous one and read it. And if every 3 months, 4 months, every 6 months, you see what's good for you, what's better for you. If you write another letter, little by little, you'll create this habit of seeing yourself differently. And you'll see also the changes. After, or you see, there's some things you say, okay, 3 years have gone by and I'm the same. Oh, and I really need to do something about this. Or, yeah, okay, yeah, it's true. I'm not like this anymore. I don't get angry like I used to. I had even forgotten about this. So it's really beautiful to do this, but we need to train in seeing ourselves beyond our body, beyond our name, beyond the function in society, beyond what we possess, beyond what others can see. Because there's another point. What we have are our traits that others can't see directly. They can't see them directly, but they can perceive them, can't they? How we live our world, how our emotions, they have an enormous influence on others. So even understanding this better is important. So when we do this exercise, little by little, we generate an identity of what continues. Because our body today is the same body as 10 years ago? No. If someone say yes, I say your body today is the same as when you had 3 years, when you were 3 years old. It's the same continuity, but it's not the same body. And what about the mind? Is it the same mind? There's the continuity of habits that little by little transform, and this is what we need to observe. So we write our introduction letter. Who we are, who am I? Even on a very practical level. That first power, your will and testament. Second one, your introduction level, the introduction letter. But here we're trying to lessen our attachment to our body, because at death, it's difficult. It's very difficult if we don't have a sense of continuity, because we don't want to cease to exist. And if we identify ourselves with something that can go beyond this body and this life, this difficulty is already lessened greatly. Lama Gangchen Rinpoche would say, once he said to me, and once I heard him say to me, what would you say about someone who goes to a hotel and they start rearranging the hotel room? So let's say you get here to Milan, you go to a hotel room, and then you go to IKEA and you go buy artwork and furniture, and you don't even know how many days you have to stay there. What would you say about someone who did that? You say, well, why did you even come here? You stay in the you're in the hotel room. Take care of what you need to do, but don't spend your time remodeling the hotel room. And Lama Gangchen Rinpoche would say that our body is like that hotel room. We check in, and when our holiday is over, we do check out, and there'll be our trip, and we don't know which way it'll go, but we'll find another hotel room and we check in again. But what's important is not the hotel room, but the person that goes from one hotel room to another. So the fundamental thing is that we're in this hotel room. So it's not just our body, but the whole social cultural context in which we live in. Imagine Imagine the hotel room. There's the hotel room, but there's also the pool, there's the gym, there's the restaurant, there are the other guests. And what's important when you go to a hotel is not the room, but how you get in and how you get out. You you come out as a person with more with better experiences. Are you a better person thanks to these experiences, or is it the opposite? I don't know if this analogy is clear. So now we're in this hotel room, and we have our guests, some guests, um, in the same hotel. The closest ones are our family members, but the, one day we're going to say goodbye to all this. But if we compare from when we entered and when we leave, who have we become? As at the very least, we should try to die a better person than the one that was born, which is not that obvious. Just to make sure that our interactions in life make it so that we are a better person, better in the sense that we have more patience, less anger, less resentment, more love, less hate, etc. Be a better person than the one that came in. So we shouldn't be attached to that. We shouldn't be attached to that hotel room. And no matter how much I love those who stay in the rooms next to me, at sooner or later I'm going to have to say goodbye. So what's important is what continues. It's a little harder than the first one, but it is still possible, right? The third power. The third power has to do with the power of opposition. The power of opposition has to do with recognizing what we don't want to take with us after death. Let's imagine that we're about to leave for a trip and we have all of our luggage, and we ask ourselves what we don't want to take with us. I'll give you my own example. Now quite a few years have gone by. I looked at myself and I said to myself, I don't want to be reborn lazy. Because what do we bring with us from one life to the next? The same thing that we already brought into this life. Because in this lifetime, how many lifetimes have we had? More than one, right? In the sense now, I've already counted, maybe 4 or 5 for me so far. The point is, there are moments where things change, but there's something that we bring from one life to another, even within this life. Someone who's lazy, if you don't do something, you will stay lazy. So I saw myself as being lazy, and I said to myself, I don't want to be reborn lazy. No, I don't want it. So this is something that I don't want to take with me. What else do I not want? What else do I not want to take with me? These conditionings, negative predispositions, attachment, anger, fear, hate, uncertainty, envy, and the habits of lying, the habit of, how do you say, trying to cheat others, to taking advantage of others. There are many habits one can develop. And what continues from one life to another, what continues are our predispositions. it's actually very similar to the description of DNA that goes from life to life. Once I read an article of from an English researcher who had done research on identical twins, and she said two people are born with the exact same DNA, but she looked at what happened in their lifetime, what's similar, what's different, and she did research for years and years, and she found identical twins that actually grew up in separate contexts, separated at birth. So identical twins that were separated at birth. Who knows why? And she observed the 40 years of life of these identical twins and looked at what happened. She spent her whole life with doing this research, and what she saw and what touched me was that DNA doesn't determine, but it is actually a question of probability. So when we are born, our DNA gives many, many possibilities. And depending on the external environment and the inner environment, our evolution, our thoughts, we activate one aspect of DNA or another. Once it's activated, okay? When we talk about karma, it's said that from one life to another, we bring with us the imprint of our habits, of our character traits. And when you bring this imprint from one life to another, it's not something that has to actually manifest, but depending on the choices one makes and the inner and the outer environment, one imprint can be activated or another. And this reminds me of once Lama Gangchen Rinpoche, he went to his main master, Chapse Dorje Chang, Trijang Rinpoche, and he said to him, this was in the 1960s, Lama Gangchen Rinpoche was in a difficult time of his life, and he lived in Varanasi, and he was studying at the University of Sanskrit, but he had no intention of becoming a Sanskrit scholar. He was sent there. Didn't have much choice. It was a difficult time for him. He hardly had money for food. He had to choose. He could eat basically one time a day, and he needed to choose sometimes to go see his master or eat. And once he asked his master, in my opinion, I think there's been a mistake. I can't be the reincarnation of Gangchen Tsapen La, such a high-level Lama, so spiritually developed. If that were the case, I would be somewhere else. I wouldn't be here suffering. Look at there are people much better off than me. I don't think I think there's been a mistake. Otherwise I'd be in a pure land. Instead, look at where I am. And Trijang Rinpoche answered, first of all, I have no doubt that you are the reincarnation of Gangchen Tsapen La, and there's a beautiful story between them. We'll talk about this another time. Trijang Rinpoche, very briefly, one day he was traveling in Tibet, and where he lived in the where he lived at the at the time in the Gangchen monastery, and there was the main road, and Trijang Rinpoche had heard of Gangchen Tsapen La, who was a healing Lama, and he had never met him. He went to go find him. So this is obviously the previous life of Lama Gangchen. And so he got to the monastery of Gangchen and asked to be received from Gangchen Tsapen La. Gangchen Tsapen La that he couldn't receive him. not today. I'll see you soon. And in that night, where Trishan Rinpoche actually slept in that monastery, maybe 550 meters away, he was at a retreat center. And that night, Kachin Sapenlat died, and he had already prepared himself. Was following a specific diet to die well. Anyway, he died that night. And he said to Trishan Rinpoche, I'll see you soon. That created that link with Trishan Rinpoche. And Trishan Rinpoche took the commitment to find his reincarnation. And he found Lama Gangchen. He met Lama Gangchen. And he said, I have no doubt that you are the reincarnation of Kachin Sampenla, but remember that when you die, what continues from one life to another are mostly imprints. And a spiritually developed person, when he's reborn, he is born with those imprints, and as long as those imprints are not sprouted, can't manifest. There's no difference in appearance between that person and an ordinary person. And I'm sure that sooner or later those traits of spiritual development, they will sprout and they will manifest. So when we die, we're bringing with us these imprints, and it's up to us to activate them or not. So what are the things that I don't want to take to my next life that I have now? And what can we do to not bring certain things? We need to face them now. If I don't want to bring resentment, if I don't want to bring this habit of anger, I need to face it now. If I don't want to bring with me sadness or hatred or envy or any other habit. For example, it says someone who lies a lot is reborn with this predisposition to easily lie. Have you ever noticed that there's some very, very young children? They're born with their own predispositions. I've seen children that actually feel pleasure in killing insects. Instead, others want to protect animals. Sometimes between brothers and sisters within the same family. And this is, in Buddhism, it's explained that one brings his own predispositions, and it's one of the most important things when one is born. That's why it said that when you have a child, having a child is inviting a stranger into your life forever. You never know who's coming, right? Even if today, I remember a friend in Brazil who did artificial insemination, and she could choose basically from the menu the hair like this. I said, yeah, you can choose as much as you want, but the one who's going to come, really, you don't know. And there's a genetic part. There are many things, but there's also a part that we just don't know. But what we bring with us after, we know. So the question is very easy. What do I not want to bring with me? And what should I do towards that? I need to oppose that now. I don't have time to waste, because every time I repeat a habit, I'm reinforcing it. The more I complain, the more I will complain. The more I act in a certain way, the more easy that attitude will be. And these imprints are created from these habits. It's like walking. It's like walking barefoot in the same, or it's like walking in the same place again and again. So your footprint just gets more and more marked. So our own dynamics, our predispositions, of body, speech, and mind, things that we don't want to repeat in the future. So we need to oppose them now without making any kind of excuses. No, because you don't know, Lama. Ever since I was a child, When I was a child, this happened to me and that happened to me, and that's why now I act like this. Okay, I'm sorry. There's no one here that doesn't have his own traumas. No one. We all have them. This reminds me, me as a child, when I met Lama Gangchen, I was 6 years old, 5 years old, and as a child, I was fixated on something I didn't like, and want to, I didn't want to bathe. I had a total aversion to taking a shower. It's one of those. I remember these scenes of my parents would have to put me under the water, and before pushing me under the water, she would say, at least one trauma you need to have. And in Tibet, if you know, not like this anymore, but Tibet of the past, um, one would take a shower, if even that, once a year. This Karma Rishi, where this day of Karma Rishi, everyone would go to the river and wash. And there were some people who have maybe washed 3 times in their lives. Lama Lawan told me this story that one day an an he met an old man in Tibet, and this man said, "No, the shower. I've taken the shower once in my life." And it was my grandson who lives in the city. He said, "No, no, Grandpa, you need to take a shower for your health." And and actually, it was his granddaughter takes him to a to a hotel room in the city and had him take a shower. Said, "Oh, I had such a stomach ache after that. I'll I'll never I'll never do that again." And Lama Gangchen would tell me, this is one of the clear signs that you're a reincarnation of a Tibetan, that you don't want to shower. And my mother was so desperate because before going to bed, I would pretend to brush my teeth. I was fixated with this. And she talked to a doctor, and the doctor said, just let him be, pretend that he's doing it, and he'll 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 understand at a certain point. And it's true. At a certain point, I had some pain, and I went to her. And we have traumas of every kind that we bring with us. But if we need to really ask ourselves what we want to take with us and what we don't want to take with us. Jokes and funny jokes aside. We have the imprints, and it's up to us to do something. If someone comes and says, "But you don't know, I have my own traumas, and I don't want to minimize them." But what you do with those traumas today, that depends on you. All of us here, we have our traumas in one way or another. Some maybe more or less. Some who brings predispositions from previous lives. But what are we doing today with what we have? This is a choice that we have. We can face it alone. We can ask for help. We can develop the awareness to want to do something about it, but something needs to be done. So the question is, who do I want to be at the moment of death? Who do I want to be when I die? And I remember the first time I heard this, it was from a disciple from Lama Gangchen. She's a quite famous actress on TV, and when she met Lama Gangchen, it's because she was at the top of her career. There was no internet at the time. There there weren't any, international channels. There were just the four local national channels. So the soap opera stars were the most famous, and she was one of them. She was extremely well known. I mean, she couldn't walk down the street; everyone would run and recognize her. And and at this moment in her life, she has started to have this problem where she would lose her hair. And then Lama Gangchen, when she wanted to see Lama Gangchen, he explained to him, and so Rinpoche said to her, "So you became famous, and your hair is falling out." And she said, "Yes." And he started laughing and laughing. He laughed so much. "Oh, look, now you're so famous, and now your hair is falling out." And he said, "Don't worry. Take these these, take a red and a white pill, negamenchik. Uh-huh. These red and white pills, you can they exist even today. You can put a white one and a red one in Nivea cream, and then other white and red in water that you drink." And he said, "You just put the cream on your head," and then it worked. So the first thing she understood was that that her fame wasn't in her, but it was in others. Said that as an actress, I've done so many things in my career. Some things were wonderful, but not recognized. Other things not so great, but very well recognized. But this fame of mine is not mine. It's in other. It's in it. It's in others. And when someone feels famous, maybe they think special, but she realized that she hadn't changed. And then she said, in that moment that she met Lama Gangchen, she had become what she had wanted to be as an adult. She was rich, she was famous, she was doing the job that she wanted to do. She had reached what she had wanted, and he taught me. He taught me what I want to be at my moment of death. And this is a very, very important question. At the time of death, who do I want to be? I want to be at peace with my past. I want to be at peace with myself, with the future. This is in the next power. We'll talk about that. But it's important to have this perspective and ask ourselves, what do I not want to take with me? And we take one thing at a time and we face it seriously. Because let's remember something. When we have a certain reaction, we repeat a habit, we repeat a dynamic. We are reinforcing that. It's not about the immediate reaction and the effects of that reaction. It reinforces a habit. It reinforces a conditioning, a dynamic. So what I don't want to take with me, I need to leave it here. And as we saw, from the first to the third is more difficult. Now that those first two have become really easy. The fourth power. The fourth power has to do with, it's called the power of desire, but it makes reference to a desire that transcends this life. What do I want after this life? And being able to have a desire, an objective, an idea of something that transcends this life. This allows us to have a view of continuity. The difficulty that we have in this, because our tendency is to is want for our next life what we didn't manage to get in this life. Okay, in my next life, I want to be a doctor. I didn't manage this one. I like to find a person like this. I want to have this kind of family. I want to have perfect parents. Impossible. I want this or that. No. What is it that we really want for our next life? Without getting into the idea of, okay, is there reincarnation, not reincarnation? Let's say that there is. What do I want for myself after? Independently of where I will be and in what context I will find myself in, I desire to be able to cultivate a sincere path of growth, to maintain and cultivate a state of gratitude and patience and joy. Because even there, what I desire, I mean, there are things that depend on me and things that don't depend on me. I want to be reborn in a context where everyone is perfectly peaceful, generous, and loving, and the environment's perfect without any difficulty. I'm not even able to desire that because it's so far from what I think is possible. Once I did an exercise which wasn't at all easy, but it was interesting. I imagine this. Imagine that we die now. Now let's say that we have the total freedom with the mind of now, and that we're able to choose where we want to be reborn. How can you manage? What should you do? The first thing I thought was appearances uh, are tricky because, but when you choose your parents, for example, I'm imagining being in the bardo. In 49 days, you need to meet your parents, choose which parents. That's very difficult. Personally, I I did a whole tour and then I said I want to be reborn exactly where I am. At least I feel more secure, more secure. But it's not obvious. And this brings me to something I've talked about a couple times. Obviously, the context in which we're born is important, but what's more important are the resources that we have. But it's about like there's that it's a little bit like this image of taking of going on a world tour on a sailboat. Um, there was this documentary of this girl in Australia or New Zealand, I don't remember, and she wanted to sail around the world in a sailboat. And she was at 16. She did 210 days alone without ever touching land, without ever stopping the boat, just completely by herself. And she toured. She went around the world, facing terrible and very, very dangerous storms and currents. But what kind of certainty did she have that she could do something like that? What did she have? She had trust in herself and in her boat. She knew that no matter what happened, she had the resources to face anything. Because how can you leave on a trip like that, looking for certainties and courage, thinking that, oh, everything will go fine? It's not like that. And when we when we leave this body, and we go on this trip for in another life, how can we be sure that everything will be fine? I mean, do you know anyone who's led a life where everything was fine? I've never known anyone like that. So what do I desire for myself that's real? I want to be born in a healthy place. I want to be able to cultivate peace, to be in a context where I can actually cultivate and develop my qualities that I bring with me. I want to be able to love and be loved. I want to be able to be in a context that is where I have the minimum necessary to survive, so that I can dedicate my life to other than just surviving. We need to dream a little bit. In Buddhism, we have the prayers. May I never be separated from the spiritual guide, and from life to life, may I enjoy the splendor of Dharma and grow spiritually. So, what do I desire for my next life? And it's hard for us to do this because normally we don't have a perspective that goes beyond where we are. But if we want to prepare ourselves for death, we need to create this, because it said that at the moment of death, where we direct our desire, it's like it has an enormous influence on what happens afterwards. There's a nice story of a monk who was about to die. This is Tibetan, and his master saw that he was about to die, and this monk, even though he was prepared, had meditated, had studied, had done many beautiful things, at the time of death, he was extremely attached to the tea that was on his table. The Tibetans really like tea. The Tibetan tea. I think that some of you have tasted Tibetan tea. I really don't like it personally. It's it makes me nauseous. There's so much butter, and it's like a kind of soup, like a consommé. There's butter, salt. Mm, The real Tibetan tea, not and the real one doesn't have milk actually. It's butter, 80% butter. I'm not kidding. Black tea and salt. That's it. Very, very strong black tea and with salt. I've seen it a couple of times. It's just not for me. Not like the one that they make here and in India. Luckily now I'm have the excuse of being lactose intolerant. Anyway, it's relative. Anyway, this monk had a tremendous amount of attachment to his tea. His tea, and so he was dying, and he wanted to drink his tea that had just been served. His master realized this, and to help him die with a mind that would go to something positive, he said, you know, in the pure land of Tushita, there's tea that is so delicious. And he started talking about the qualities of the tea in Tushita. He was inventing it, of course. He said the butter is fatter, and the tea has this quality. And so, where did he direct his mind? To Tushita. And just on a side note, Tushita is a pure land. Pure land is different than heaven. A pure land is explained as a place where the majority of people who live there are people who are spiritually developed. So the image of a pure land for me is I go to the bar in the morning, and the barman is like Lama Gangchen. I take a taxi. The taxi driver is a person of love and wisdom and awareness. Imagine living in a context where the majority of the people who live there have an inner level that's very, very well developed. This is a concept of pure land, and one of the pure lands is called Tushita. And so he talks about Tushita, and this monk dies. It's said that he actually was reborn in Tushita because he had created the causes. And at the moment of his death, his mind went in that direction. So the direction that we give our mind at the moment of death is extremely important. That's why the fourth power is desiring something that goes beyond this life. The fifth power is called the power of familiarization. The power of familiarization is the opposite of the power of the opposition. And the question is, what do I want to take with me? It doesn't matter where I'm reborn. What do I want to have with me? What kind of predispositions do I want to have? What kind of child do I want to be? Do I want to be um, um, a, a brat of a child? Because sorry, but there are bratty children. There's some children that even as small children they're difficult, and there are other children that are that are pleasant to be around. There are some children that are very jealous. And what kind of child do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? What do I want to bring with me? Do Do I want to be born with the predispositions with joy and peace and satisfaction, gratitude, for love, for respect, for stability, concentration, for virtuous conduct? Right? If I want to be born with those predispositions, then I need to create them somewhere, don't I? So, what I do today and what I do today is, and what I gradually prepare, the more I act in a certain way, the more I reinforce that habit that I'm going to take with me afterwards. So the power of familiarization is putting energy into what we want to bring with us. Now, imagine someone comes to you and you say, you put so much effort into these 5 powers, and then at a certain point, and what if reincarnation doesn't exist? And what if with the death everything ends? In my opinion, much better on many different levels. But saying it like it is, if I spend my life preparing myself for death, knowing that there's some kind of continuity, practicing the 5 powers, and there's no reincarnation, and everything ends, and with the finishing of this body, the consciousness finishes. Did these 5 powers lead me to live a better life, or am I worse off? No, a better life. So it's a win-win, as we say in English. You win in both in every aspect. Living life as if we were immortal, without preparing ourselves for death, brings us often to live our life in a more selfish way, and to not seeing what our priorities are. Okay, we just go. I'm trying to resolve problems. Here I enjoy some pleasures. Life goes on. And then we feel that there's something negative inside. We do something to forget about it. Because when we live in inner suffering, there's pain. There's some kind of, what's our tendency? To face that feeling, or do we try to forget it? Those who go shopping, those who go online and buy something, there are those who smoke, those who drink, those who do whatever it is to try to forget that pain, forgetting that inner wound. Does it heal it? No, unfortunately. I mean, if it worked, fine, but it just doesn't work like that. Sooner or later, we're back to our starting point much sooner than later. So the fact of taking life in our own hands, with the awareness of our own mortality, and knowing how to distinguish our priorities, because in front of death our priorities change seriously. It's no joke. I remember this friend of a friend, our friend Alfredo Asfieros, who worked for many, many years at the as a director in the World Bank organization. One, he says that one day, a friend of his, a colleague, who was also a director, he had to do his body, his health checkup, and he was working. He lived in another country, I don't remember where, and he had gone home to Washington briefly, and this the head of the hospital calls him and says, "I need to talk to you. You need to put your affairs in order," which means you're about to die. And he said, well, "What is it?" He spoke to him very clearly. You have um, you have a tumor completely throughout your body. We can do nothing other than accompany you. And the prognosis was no more than 2 months. And so he went back home. He canceled all of his work appointments. He started to, he picked up the courage to call his son, with whom he hadn't spoken in years. He picked up the books that he had always wanted to read and never found time to read, and he started organizing his life with this thinking that he was going to die. And after 2 days, the head of the hospital calls again and says, "I need to apologize. There was an error. There was someone with the same name, and the health records were mixed up. Your health is perfect." I would have said, if someone, first of all, tells me that I have a life-threatening disease, the first thing I would do is I would ask for a second opinion, because if I'm feeling so good, if someone says you have a terrible sickness, but I feel great, someone says, if someone says, I mean, I don't know. I mean, this has never happened to me. But if someone gives us a diagnosis like that, the first thing, let's check it out better. But what did he do once he hung up the phone? He didn't call his son. He put the books on the bookshelf. He went back to work, and he went back to work as if he were immortal. When instead, in front of death, when we're faced with death, our priorities change, and these 5 powers show us, have us check our priorities again. Obviously, if I'm preparing myself to live a very long life, I need to also prepare myself materially to support myself for this long life. But I'm not a slave. I mean, it's better to live a simpler life, and where you have more time available than the opposite. Because we live in a society where constantly we're creating false necessities. We need to live to be able to support those false necessities, those false needs. I don't know if that's clear. So even there, we see a little bit what our priorities really are. This body, Lama Gangchen once said, our body is our worst friend. The more care we take of him, the more he goes against us. We take care, we do everything, we give him food, we take him to the doctor, we do everything to take care of this body. Up to a certain point, it seems like everything's going fine, but at a certain age, it's just always something that comes out. And it's also because we're not the best, we don't take the best care actually of our body. But even if we were, it would be the same. So we need to go beyond this, have an identity that really transcends our image, our appearance, what other people think of us. Sooner or later, I'm going to die. What do I care? And this is even a bigger folly. What will they think? What will they think of me after I'm dead? What do I care? What is it worth to me? I remember when I read a book of mathematics, and the name was The History of Primary Numbers. It was a really nice book. And they talked about this life of mathematicians who had studied, who made these discoveries on primary numbers. And there's the whole story around primary numbers. And something that shocked me, and I was a little upset. I saw these great minds, these mathematicians that were incredible. But their main objective, at least how I perceived and how it was written, their main objective, or they wanted to become immortal with a theorem in their name. But then you're going to die. It's not that when you're reborn, say, oh, you're the one. Yes, we remember you. No, right? Even there, how will they remember me? No, it's useless. Sincerely speaking, what is useful is that the first power is doing something that leaves something that continues to generate a positive interdependence even after our death. That, yes. So here's a question. If I were to die today, what am I bringing with me and what am I leaving to others? The other day, I heard a conference. This professor said that he was saying that in ancient Rome, when a general would win a war and would go back, there would be a great celebration to receive him, etc. And in the middle of this celebration of recognition and honor, at a certain point, it was part of the tradition, someone would come, a slave or someone who was serving, it would come and would whisper in, so someone in lower class, and he would whisper in his ear, remember that you will also die, because death brings us with our feet, puts our feet back on the ground, and shows us what our priorities should be. What do I want to take with me? What do I want to leave for others? So these 5 powers are not impossible. They're not that difficult either. In just a few words, it's about looking at our relationship with material things, writing a will, directing our wealth, looking again at our relationship with our body, and try to have an identity that goes beyond this body. Recognize ourselves, know ourselves a little bit more from the inside. See what we don't want to take with us and try to not cultivate it anymore. Allow ourselves to dream and to desire something beyond this life, and cultivate what we want to bring with us. Last thing. And here we could open up a long discussion, but just quickly. It's said that the first level that a spiritual practitioner faces death is when when he can do that without any regret. And that's already a lot. That's the first level. It's a low level of a spiritual practitioner. Not low in the sense that it's inferior, just that there's more. The intermediate is without regret and without fear. And the high level is without regret, without fear, and a kind of joy, recognizing death as an opportunity of spiritual growth. Let's try to at least get to that first one. So, how can I be sure that at the time of death I'm at peace with my present and my past? By cultivating this peace every day, not cultivating resentment. Getting to the end of the day, that, oh, I did something stupid. Oh, but why did I do it? Oh, okay. Because I was taken by this and the other. And I take that commitment to not repeat it. And I redirect myself with affection towards myself without accumulating resentment, neither towards ourselves and neither towards others. This is fundamental. Otherwise, we accumulate, and then one day when we want to prepare ourselves for death, we don't even have that physical energy to even think about doing so. Because one thing is preparing ourselves, preparing or looking at our own resentments and our past when we're one thing is doing that today where we have the energy and the time to do something else is trying to do that when we're sick in a hospital with high fevers or etc etc. the the I mean the the more we go on, the harder it becomes. So it needs to be done now with joy. How beautiful that I can allow myself, that I can manage, that I can do this, that I can allow myself to prepare myself for death, and as a consequence, live a more meaningful life. Because at the end of the day, I take away the things that are bad for me. I cultivate what's good for me. I reassess my priorities. That seems important, isn't it? So it shouldn't be something heavy or suffering, thinking about one's own mortality. It should be something that, yes, it brings us a little bit, it calms us, it takes us to have our feet on the ground, and we ask ourselves what we're doing, what we want to be. What do we want to be at the moment of death? And death is one of the greatest incentives in directing our lives in the direction that we want it. It's said that a spiritual practitioner should think about his own life at least 3 times a day. I mean, seriously speaking, at least once a week. But do it. Otherwise, time goes by, one day after the other, and then it's Christmas, really. It goes by quickly, and then the year starts again, and then it's in so. So it's Christmas, and then in Brazil there's Carnival, and here's the war here, and then life is just going and going, and in the middle of all that we lose ourselves. We lose ourselves. We get overwhelmed by our conditionings, by our habits. And then one day we're faced with our own death, which this will happen. And we ask ourselves, am I the person that I want to be when faced with my death? And we need sincerity. This really, let's not just let that day come. Let we prepare ourselves first with awareness, with presence, with constancy. It's it's easy to forget death, that we're going to die, and not with this feeling of heaviness. Because what's heavy is living life as if one um, didn't have to die and continue cultivating what's harmful. I assure you something else, that in front, when faced with death, most of our problems just fade away. It just changes everything. Okay? But let's do it. I say it because otherwise, I mean, here we are repeating the same things. A whole lifetime of repeating the same things. Right? Many of us are already doing it, but we need to get back to this awareness. And just to remind us of this, just open just open up the news or watch an action film and say, I'm going to die too. Okay, what things are unnecessary, superfluous? Who am I and beyond this body? What is it that I want to let go of? What do I want to cultivate? So to try to really generate this level of awareness. So it's time for our dedications. It's important also to do these five powers also that so that we don't feel powerless in the front of death. At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Tashidele. Thank you, everyone. And I'll see you next week.